Good evening. This is Danny Griffith once again with Bible Investigation here at 70 West Church of Christ in Hot Springs, 948 Airport Road. Before we get into the question, I want to invite you to, if you're in the area, to come visit with us at 70 West Church of Christ for Bible study, 9 a.m. Sunday mornings, 10:15 for worship service, and 6 p.m. for Sunday evenings for worship, and 7 p.m. for devotion and Bible study. So let's get into the question we have here this evening. One of the parables Jesus spoke of in Luke chapter 16, beginning verse 1 and going through verse 13, parable of the unjust steward. Would like to, in the question here, ask about this parable is, why did Jesus commend a dishonest manager in Luke 16? Let's read this parable, verses 1 through 13, first of all. And beginning in verse 1, and Jesus, he also said to his disciples, there was a certain rich man who had a steward, or manager, so to speak, and was brought to him that this man was wasting his goods. So he called him and said unto him, What is this I hear about you? Give an account of your stewardship, for you can no longer be steward. Then the steward said within himself, What shall I do? For my master is taking the stewardship away from me. I cannot dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I have resolved what to do, that when I am when I am put out of the stewardship, one may receive me into their houses. So he called every one of his master's debtors to him, and said to the first, How much do you owe my master? And he said, 100 measures of oil. So he said to him, Take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another debtor, How much do you owe? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, Take your bill and write 80. So the master commended the unjust steward, because he had done shrewdly. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in their generation than the sons of light. And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by unrighteous mammon, that when you fail, they may receive you into everlasting home. He who is faithful in which is least is faithful also in much, and who is unjust in what is least is unjust also in much. Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit you to your trust the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in what is another man's, who will give you what is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. So we see here, after reading this parable, the question comes from verse 8. So the master commended the unjust steward because he had dealt shrewdly. And that's what the question is asked. Why did Jesus commend a dishonest manager? Some question the integrity of the master, or so to speak, Jesus, to commend the dishonest steward. That's one of the challenges of this parable. But let's ask this question. Is Jesus saying he commends evil and dishonesty behavior? Well, I think the answer to that would be no. The parable does not say he commended the steward's dishonesty actions, but his acting wisely or prudent. So the dishonored steward was wise enough there in making this decision to make sure by his actions that he would be received by other employers or into others' homes as a manager by lowering or cutting the cost of their debts before he lost his job as a steward. Jesus' comments makes clear that he did not command the dishonest actions of the manager, but rather his wisdom and his prudence, even as the Bible commands Rahab's faith in God for hiding the spies over in Joshua 6 and 17. It was for Ruth's faith that she was commended rather than her harlotry, because Rahab was a harlot. But because of her faith, when the walls of Jericho fell, her and her family were saved. Joshua 6 and 17. So the main point in this parable that we read today here is pointed to those of us who are Christians as stewards of what God has blessed us with, what he calls unrighteous mammon, or our worldly possessions that God has given us to do good in his kingdom with while living here. So when Jesus returns, we can receive the eternal life that he promises us in verse 9 of Luke. We are called upon to be faithful stewards. In 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 2, it says, "Moreover, it is required in stewards that a man be found faithful." 1 Peter 4, verse 10 says, "As every man has received the gift, even so minister the same one to another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God." So we see in Luke 16, verse 10, it says, "He that is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much." This is about character. You may not be as talented as someone else, but your character will show in the way you use your talents that you do have. In 1 Peter 1 and 5, God calls us to add to our faith virtue, and virtue knowledge, knowledge temperance, to temperance self-control, and to self-control perseverance, and godliness, brotherly kindness, and then love. So we are to grow in our spiritual knowledge in the grace of God and develop ourselves into mature Christians. So the way we handle our worldly goods, this is coming in reference to verse 11, can help us to develop spirituality. And if we determine to be honest and honorable, it will help you on your job and in your neighborhood, in your business, and so on. And that character will even find its way into your spiritual life, as well as in prayer, study, and caring for others, and worship, and so on. So developing that character, that honest and honorable character, it will help us in our spiritual lives as we live each day. God knows our hearts, and he knows also your character. God is watching. If you are not faithful with what we have been entrusted with, which actually already belongs to God, he's just given it to us, or if we're not faithful in another man's working for another individual, how can we expect to be paid for our work, spiritually speaking, and receive our eternal home? Our salvation, is a gift from God. Ephesians 2, 8 and 9, it says, "For by grace you have been saved through faith, not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast." So, in saying, quoting that verse there, we should not squander or neglect our salvation by being unfaithful stewards. The New Testament teaches us we are stewards of our lives. In Matthew 6, 24 through 26, the Bible teaches us there to take up our cross daily, deny self, and follow Jesus. Our talents also, we are to be stewards of our talents and our abilities. In Matthew 25:14 through 30, we have there the parable of the talents, where Jesus had gave different abilities, talents to different people, and expected those talents to be put to use. We're stewards of our time. Ephesians 5:15 and 16. See that we walk with wisdom, redeeming our time because the days are evil. And of course, excuse me, we're stewards of our money that God has blessed us with. In Luke 12:16 through 21, we have the parable of the rich fool who trusted in wealth, and laid up treasure for himself and was not rich towards God. We see he had barns filled and with his goods and had no place to put them, so he tore down those barns and built bigger barns and trusted in his wealth and said, laid back all of that and said, eat, drink, and be merry, and so, that's what God blesses us with here. Our lives, our talents, our time, our money, all of these things God expects us to use wisely. So in answer to this question here that was given, why did Jesus commend a dishonest manager? Well, actually, the answer I give was in the first part of the lesson over here. The parable does not say that he commended the steward's dishonest actions, but his acting wisely or prudent. The dishonored steward was wise enough to make sure by his actions that he would be received by other employers or into others' houses by lowering or cutting the cost of the debts of those who owed his master. So before he done all of this, before he lost his job as steward. So Jesus is commending the dishonest steward, not for his dishonesty, but for his wise decisions that he made so he would have a job when he lost that job. This man's wisdom. Even as the Bible commended Rahab, we already spoke of that. So we see that his commending was not for his dishonesty, but for his wise decision that he made before he lost his job. So I hope this has helped you with this question. This has been a Bible investigation, and I hope you'll join us next time. Thank you.